The words hit me like a blade pressed straight against my chest. Do you want me to call my boyfriend? For a moment, the air in the room turned heavy, and I couldn't tell if I was hearing things or if she had truly said it. My mind screamed for clarification, but my body froze. It wasn't the kind of sentence you could misinterpret. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't sarcasm. It was a confession hidden inside a taunt, delivered in the middle of an argument that had started over something small, something so ordinary it now felt ridiculous. I had always thought that fights between us were just heated words, storms that would pass. But this time was different. This time she pulled out a weapon I didn't even know she had. She looked me dead in the eye when she said it, her voice steady, her posture unshaken. I wanted to shout. I wanted to ask her what the hell she meant by that. But instead, I stood there in silence, listening to the blood pound in my ears, realizing that this wasn't a slip of the tongue. This wasn't something people said unless they wanted to make a point or unless it was true. And that's when my world began to shift. The fight had started over something stupid. I can't even remember the exact trigger anymore. Maybe it was about the bills. Maybe it was about her coming home late again. Maybe it was about me noticing the way she stared at her phone with a little smile, one that wasn't meant for me. The details blurred together, but the feeling was sharp. I was being pushed aside. She raised her voice, I raised mine, and somewhere between the accusations and the counter-accusations, she dropped that bombshell. Boyfriend. A word that didn't belong in a marriage. A word that shouldn't have existed in our home. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. If I let my emotions explode right then, I knew she'd twist it into anger management or insecurity. No, I had to let her words settle like acid on stone. I had to process what they really meant. My thoughts spiraled. Was this a bluff? Was she trying to provoke me? Or had she simply revealed the truth by accident? I couldn't sleep that night. She went to bed as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just shattered the very foundation of our life together. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying her voice in my head, the exact pitch, the exact look in her eyes. She wasn't bluffing. I knew it deep down. That's when suspicion hardened into certainty. Before this night, there had been signs. Too many of them, now that I looked back. Late nights at work. Sudden showers when she came home. Her phone turned face down on the table, locked with a password she never used to need. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Arguments that felt manufactured, like she was looking for reasons to be mad at me. I had ignored them all because I didn't want to believe. I wanted to trust. I wanted to be the husband who gave the benefit of the doubt. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how much you try to bury it. Now it was here, glaring at me, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I acted normal. I kissed her on the forehead, I made breakfast, I pretended like nothing had changed. But inside, my stomach churned. Every move she made, every word she said, I analyzed. Was she texting him when she smiled at her phone? Was she lying when she told me she had a late meeting? Was her perfume stronger than usual because she wanted to impress someone else? The seed of doubt had become a forest fire, and it consumed me. I didn't confront her, not yet. Confrontation would give her the chance to lie, to cover her tracks, to make me feel crazy. No, I had to be smarter than that. If she had a boyfriend, if she was really living a double life, I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. And so, I began to watch. I became hyper-aware of her schedule. I memorized the times she left for work, the times she came home, the excuses she gave. I noticed how some nights she came home with her hair slightly damp, even though it hadn't been raining. I noticed the small changes in her clothes, how she started dressing better for meetings. But the most telling thing was her phone. That little rectangle of secrets she guarded more than anything else. She used to leave it on the couch, on the counter, sometimes even in the bathroom. But now? She kept it on her at all times, like a soldier protecting classified information. One night, she fell asleep early, exhaustion written all over her face. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up just long enough for me to catch a glimpse. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." My chest tightened. My throat went dry. That was all I needed to see. I didn't even unlock the phone. I didn't need to. The words burned themselves into my brain, etching a scar I knew would never fade. She had a boyfriend. And she wasn't even trying that hard to hide it. But here's the thing, I didn't explode. I didn't wake her up and demand answers. Instead, I sat in the dark and let the rage simmer, let it transform into something sharper, something more dangerous. Because in that moment, I knew I wasn't just going to be another betrayed husband. I wasn't going to beg for explanations or cry for forgiveness. No. I was going to make her regret ever saying those words to me. And this? This was only the beginning. The next morning, she woke up humming. It wasn't unusual for her to hum, but after what I had seen the night before, it felt different, like she was carrying a secret melody only she understood. She moved around the kitchen effortlessly, pouring coffee, sliding bread into the toaster, her phone always within reach. I sat across from her, watching closely. Every flicker of her eyes, every half-smile, every glance at the glowing screen. She thought I wasn't paying attention. She thought I was just another man sipping his coffee before work. But inside, I was memorizing everything. Her phone buzzed once. She tilted it slightly, shielding the screen from me as if I couldn't notice. The corners of her lips twitched upward for just a second. Then she looked at me, her expression neutral, her voice casual. "Don't forget we need to pick up groceries this evening," she said. I nodded. Of course. But I knew damn well she wouldn't be home in the evening. The first undeniable proof came faster than I expected. She left that night, claiming she had a meeting with her team. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind screamed at me to follow her immediately, but I forced myself to wait. Give her time. Don't look desperate. Don't tip her off. I waited 15 minutes, then slipped into my car and drove. My hands tightened around the wheel as I trailed her at a safe distance, headlights dimmed just enough not to draw attention. She didn't drive toward her office. She didn't even head in that direction. Instead, she took the highway exit that led to the other side of town. My stomach twisted as I realized she was going somewhere familiar, not work, not errands. Somewhere personal. She pulled into a dimly lit parking lot behind a small restaurant. I slowed my car, staying back, watching as another vehicle pulled in beside hers. A man stepped out. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I didn't need to. The way she rushed into his arms told me everything. They didn't linger in the lot. They got into his car and drove off together. I followed from a distance, headlights off, pulse pounding. I watched them park outside a hotel. My chest burned, but I didn't move. I couldn't storm in there, not yet. Not without a plan. Instead, I sat in my car for an hour, staring at the glowing hotel sign, each passing minute hammering the truth deeper into my skull. She wasn't bluffing when she said she had a boyfriend. She was rubbing it in my face. The drive home was a blur. The house felt colder when I walked in, emptier, like the walls themselves knew the truth now. I sat in the dark living room, waiting for her. She came home close to midnight, smelling faintly of perfume and cigarette smoke. She never smoked. She dropped her bag on the counter and stretched, yawning as if she'd just had a long day at work. "You're still up?" she asked, feigning surprise. "Yeah," I said evenly. "Couldn't sleep." She gave me a quick nod, not even meeting my eyes, and headed straight for the shower. That shower, the one she always took after late meetings. I sat there, fists clenched, my chest tight with rage and humiliation. But I forced myself to breathe. Forced myself to stay calm. Confrontation wasn't my weapon. Patience would be. The next few days were torture. Every time she left, I wondered where she was going. Every time her phone buzzed, I wondered what he was saying to her. Every laugh, every secret smile, all felt like daggers twisting deeper. But the pain was slowly transforming into something else. Cold calculation. I began to gather information. Quietly. I memorized her schedule. I checked mileage on her car, receipts she carelessly left behind, even the way she dressed before leaving. I noticed how her makeup was just a little heavier on meeting nights. How she wore the perfume I'd bought her years ago, the one she hadn't touched in months. One evening, I managed to get her phone while she was in the shower. My hands shook as I scrolled through messages, but the moment I saw his name, my heart turned to stone. The texts were explicit. Intimate. Things she hadn't said to me in years. Pictures she'd sent him that she never would have dared send me. One message stood out. Can't wait until you're mine completely. Mine completely. The words burned into my mind. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning a future with him. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I began preparing. I made copies of everything, screenshots of messages, photos of her car parked at the hotel, even recordings of phone calls she didn't know I overheard. Piece by piece, I built a case. Not for court, but for myself. For when the time came to strike. But patience is a heavy burden. The more evidence I gathered, the more I wanted to unleash it, to throw it in her face and watch her crumble. Yet something inside me whispered, not yet. Wait. Let her dig her own grave deeper. And she did. She grew bolder, more careless. Some nights she didn't even bother coming home until after midnight. Other times, she'd claim exhaustion and go to bed early, phone clutched in her hand as if it were oxygen. I played along. I smiled when she smiled, nodded when she lied, and kissed her cheek as she left for her meetings. All the while, rage sat coiled inside me like a snake, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. We had barely spoken all day when she suddenly snapped at me for no reason, accusing me of being distant, of not caring about her anymore. The irony made me want to laugh in her face. And then, as if to drive the knife deeper, she pulled out her phone mid-argument and said, "Do you want me to call him right now? Would that make you understand?" Her eyes glittered with defiance, daring me to react. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I simply stared at her, silent, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. That silence rattled her more than shouting ever could. She stormed out of the room, muttering curses under her breath, and slammed the door. I sat there in the aftermath, pulse steady, mind sharper than ever. She thought she was in control. She thought I was just going to sit there and take it. But she had no idea that every step she took was leading her straight into the trap I was setting. And when it finally closed, she would lose everything. Everything. When people talk about revenge, they picture fireworks, public spectacles, dramatic confrontations, truth hurled across a crowded room until it shatters. I had imagined it too, once. But revenge is rarely fireworks. It's a long fuse. It's patient. It's the slow tightening of a noose that feels, to the person at the center of it, like inevitability. After the Sunday outburst, the mask she wore began to crack faster. She grew careless in ways that were deliciously stupid, leaving a receipt where I could find it, answering a call using one word and a laugh, humming a song that I traced back to a playlist I'd never seen before. She moved like someone who believed she'd already won, who assumed I was too damaged or too weak to do anything but sit and watch. That arrogance gave me leverage. I had built a dossier, digital threads and paper traces, little fragments that made a picture. I printed certain texts and hid them in places she never looked. I took photos of the hotels, the cars, the parking lot where she and he had met. I recorded the way she lied. I kept receipts. I saved voicemails. Evidence is a currency. I collected it until I had more than enough. But what I wanted wasn't only to expose her. I wanted the scale of the betrayal to be known the way betrayal should feel, undeniable, intimate, humiliating in a way she couldn't gaslight away. It had to be surgical. So I stopped fantasizing about yelling and storming. I started thinking like someone who read the book on patience. Step 1: Isolation. When someone cheats, there's always a network. Secrets are fed by complacency, by friends who look away, by relatives who accept excuses. If I could widen the circle of discomfort and unsettle her support system, she would be forced to choose between her lies and the life she'd built. She would be forced to see the collapse up close. I began small. I called her sister not to accuse, but to ask questions under the guise of concern. I phrased things carefully, calibrating my tone so that confusion, not rage, would be the first thing she heard. Has she seemed different lately? Seemed tired? Distant? The answers were guarded. Her sister said she'd noticed she was distracted, and then the line went quiet. It smelled like knowledge and fear. I smelled guilt. Her closest friend was a tougher nut. She'd been in our lives for years, the kind of friend who brought casseroles when we were sick and babysat when things got busy. I chose a different approach: proximity. I started showing up at the places I knew she and that friend frequented. I ran into them by chance, months of careful timing disguised as luck. I smiled. I was the reasonable, wounded husband asking, "Everything okay?" People like to fill silence. She did. The friend would protest at first, and then slip into the safe rhythm of rationalizing. "You're reading into this. She's just stressed." Those words were the mortar between their lies. But the mortar had gaps. Each interaction I steered toward the truth. I let small seeds of suspicion fall into their conversations. I never lied, I only asked questions that made them uncomfortable. Ask enough questions in the right light and people volunteer more than they should. I was patient. I watched the way their faces changed when I mentioned nothing directly but everything indirectly. They had the option to deny. They didn't. At home, I kept the scene ordinary. I kept the routines, making coffee, folding laundry she'd abandoned, watching the same television shows she pretended to like. I cooked dinners, occasionally wearing the apron she once loved. Normalcy is a cloak that hides the teeth of what's beneath. She didn't notice arrogance is a powerful blindfold. Or maybe she noticed and didn't care. Either way, it fed my plan. I also used technology like a second language. I'd never been the type to pry, but desperation makes students of the otherwise unwilling. I learned how to track a phone with a breadcrumb trail, how to access the metadata in photos, how to build a timeline from timestamps. If evidence is currency, then context is the vault that proves it's not counterfeit. I built that context and with it, confidence. One night, a chance window opened. Her phone, once guarded like a relic, lay face up on the kitchen counter. She'd gone to the market and left it in the chaos of a half-packed bag. I didn't touch it at first. My plan always required the illusion that I hadn't. But a stray notification popped up, a calendar invite. It was scheduled for 2 days later at a spa downtown. Title: Lunch. Attendees: 1. Location: a private suite. That was all I needed to move from passive accumulation to active plotting. I booked a table at a small bistro that sat between the spa and a boutique hotel. From there I could see the spa entrance and the hotel drop-off lane. I would not confront. I would follow. But not tonight. The game required more. I began to test her carefully. I'd rearrange my schedule so I accidentally worked late on nights she'd planned to go out. I called to say I couldn't pick up for a dinner reservation. I made small mistakes that were bait. She responded predictably, quick lies, flustered apologies when caught, then that same confident smile when I pretended forgiveness. Her veneer was paper-thin. Revenge, though, is not just about catching someone, it's about breaking the structure of their arrogance by making them feel the loss of control. With that in mind, I started a quieter campaign of disruption. I cancelled a few of her routines anonymously, a cancelled beauty package sent to our address with a note that it had been double booked, a voicemail left on her phone labeled "from your ex" that created a momentary tremor she had to explain to herself. Little things. They set her off balance and made her depend on the certainty of her secret like an addiction. When you take away certainty, the addict panics. One afternoon, while she was at work, I took the car she used for meetings. She always left an umbrella in it. Small things like that reveal the mundane of someone's life. In the glove compartment, behind the manual, I found a receipt from the same hotel I'd been watching. It had a handwritten note on the back, a time, a name that wasn't ours, a shorthand that meant nothing to casual eyes but everything to me. I photographed it, then slipped it back as if I'd never touched it. I wanted her to assume she was still safe. There's a special kind of satisfaction in the slow collection of proof. My anger dulled into a bright, efficient focus. Each artifact I gathered was a violin string I could pluck to make the music of her unraveling start. But the more I collected, the more I worried about the people who'd enabled her, not only friends, but family, people who'd rather maintain appearances than hold someone accountable. The discovery that changed everything came not from a text or a receipt, but from a voice. 2 weeks into my quiet operation, I met her mother at the grocery store. It was a fluke. Occasional coincidences are useful in a long con. Her mother hugged me the way mothers do when they suspect something is wrong, with reserve and just the right amount of distance. We spoke in the produce aisle where the light flattened our faces. "How are things?" she asked, as mothers ask without invite. I considered my words. Truth might reveal too much, and anger might ruin the play. I chose the middle ground, the practiced tone of someone who feels wounded and wants to be understood, not pitted. "We've had some distance," I said. "I'm trying to figure it out." She nodded, and then, in a voice lowered as if to keep the vegetables from hearing, she said something that felt like a blow to the head, "I know." My stomach dropped. I looked up too quickly. Her eyes were warm with pity and cold with the stone of old knowledge. "Know what?" I asked, because even then, a part of me hoped she didn't mean it. She sighed. "That she's been seeing someone." The sentence expanded, heavy as a panther. "What do you mean? When did you?" She shrugged like a woman trying to move a burden she never wanted to lift. "I've seen signs. I thought it was a phase, stress at work. I thought she was unhappy, but her voice tightened. I asked once, and she told me some story about extra shifts. I believed her. The confession was both an accusation and a plea for absolution. She was trying, clumsily, to hand me a part of the truth and keep the rest for herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, because that was the only question that mattered then. She looked away. "I didn't want to ruin things. He's a good man." The qualifier was almost comical. Good men don't make wives keep secrets. "And you two have always seemed happy." She searched my face for the phantom of the man she wished me to be. "I thought it wasn't my place." "Isn't that how it always goes? People choose comfort over conflict. They let a betrayal flourish because denying it keeps the world smooth. But a smooth veneer is brittle." I left the store a different man. For the first time, the pattern became clear in a way it hadn't before. She hadn't acted alone. Her mother's look of softness had been a shield she'd used to hide behind, her sister's pauses had been accomplices, her friends' excuses had been complicit. The network was not just passiveness, it was active denial. That night, I made a list. Not a list of grievances, but of names and connections. Who had been in the room when she lied? Who had texted after midnight? Who had looked away when the truth sat under the table like a wet animal? Names went on the paper, neat and deliberate. It felt like constructing a map of a colony you planned to evacuate and burn. The map informed my next move. Exposure is most painful when it comes through people you trust. If someone's mother said she knew and did nothing, then public knowledge through mutual friends would create an unbearable pressure. The goal wasn't to humiliate for the sake of cruelty, it was to force the truth into the open so that she could no longer hide behind the people who'd shielded her. I began to email. Carefully written notes to friends and a few family members, worded as quietly concerned inquiries rather than witch hunts. "Hey," I wrote, "I'm trying to understand. Have you noticed anything off lately? I don't want drama, just need clarity." The replies were a mix, some blank stares, some evasions, some canned support. A few, to my surprise, were honest. "I don't know what you think," one friend wrote. "But I have seen things." Those words broadened the canyon between appearance and truth. One message arrived that stabbed me deeper than any of the others. It was from a name I'd expected to be neutral, a cousin. A supposed ally, and the message contained a photo. In the photo, blurred but unmistakable, she stood with him at a small backyard party. The caption, "Finally the secret we've been keeping." Secret we've been keeping. The pronouns all but declared the little conspiracy that had swallowed reason. The betrayal wasn't some isolated act, it had been a group decision of convenience, an unvoiced agreement that appearances mattered more than loyalty. The people I thought might be bridges of hope were the mortar that had sealed me out. My rage returned, sharpened by the sting of complicity. I remember sitting in my car afterward, hands clenched around the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. For a few minutes I allowed myself to imagine the blow-by-blow, the confrontations, the public shame, the whispered apologies no one would accept. Then I breathed and the plan resumed its cold form. Revenge, I reminded myself, was a siege. It required patience and the quiet application of pressure until everything that was solid began to crack. So I adapted. If they wouldn't give me the satisfaction of public truth on their own, I'd manufacture a situation where truth would become unavoidable. I would not rely on emotion or spectacle. I would set up a sequence of events carefully controlled, impossible to gaslight, that led to the inevitable. I mapped out who would be told, when, and how. The revelations had to cascade, each one feeding into the next, so there would be no safe place left for lies. By this point, my hatred had taken on an almost clinical clarity. It was no longer about her face or her touch. It was a project, a thing I could measure and move and calibrate. When people asked if I wanted to reconcile, I didn't answer. Reconciliation had nothing to do with the path forward. What I wanted was a resurrection of the self that had been allowed to be ignored for too long. Exposing her, exposing their complicity, was the route. The next phase would be the cruelest and most precise. I would make her feel the loss of control she had given away in the comfort of secret texts and midnight meetings. I would show her mother, her sister, her friend the map of choices they had made. I would leave no plausible alternative. And when the consequences arrived, I would not be the man people expected, a raging, ruined husband. I would be the calm architect of truth, standing with the evidence polished and irrefutable. The weight of it would be hers to carry, and she would find that the people who once protected her had traded their silence for their own fear. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with the list of names, receipts, and printed messages spread like a coroner's report, I felt something cold and new settle in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was the absolute certainty of a man who had found his reason and would not be turned from it. The trap wasn't set yet. But the teeth were in place. The next moves would require finesse and timing. I would have to be invisible in the way a shadow is invisible until it falls across your face. And somewhere inside me, beneath the anger, beneath the meticulous plans, something uncoil, a part of me that liked, against every human decency, the thought of watching their comfortable world finally have to account for what it had cost me. I closed the file, turned off the lamp, and went to bed with the smallest of smiles. The game, I told myself, had only just begun. The moment had been coming for months, an inevitability I'd carved out with the patience of a mason. Now that it arrived, it felt almost underwhelming at first because the real work had already been done. Revenge, I learned, is less about the explosion and more about the architecture, the careful placement of supports so that when the final beam is removed, everything that once seemed stable collapses under its own weight. I don't gamble with theatrics. I prefer precision. So I made a plan that looked harmless on the surface and lethal where it mattered. Phase 1 was the social avalanche. If she had built a world of small lies adorned by other people's silence, then I would transform that silence into a chorus of witnesses. I started with the cousin who'd sent me the backyard photo. I met him for coffee and let the conversation go warm and casual while I slipped the image onto my phone and let it glow between us, like a sluice gate opening. He recognized the backyard immediately, the faces, the drinks. He laughed at first, nervy and defensive, then his laugh died. I didn't yell. I only showed him the printouts I'd made, messages, receipts, timestamps. The laughter turned into avoidance, then into panic. Once you show someone a constructed map of the life they're complicit in, their choices narrow. From there, the cascade began. A message to an old friend who'd always been a social linchpin in our circle. A careful, private conversation with a coworker who'd exchanged 2 friendly pleasantries with her at the holiday party. Each person I told was given a simple choice: keep your head down and accept that this is the truth, or face having the truth come out without the courtesy of a warning. People don't like to be forced into moral clarity. They like to float above it. But when you hand them a stack of evidence that's been baked into paper and pixels, they usually fold. And they did. One by one, friends who had been convenient allies began to distance themselves in ways that were unmistakable. Invitations that used to arrive on our doorstep for movie nights or dinners didn't come anymore. The group chat that once buzzed with memes went silent. It's funny, people will avoid the discomfort of a conversation that might cost them something, even if that conversation would finally be honest. Their silence was not protection, it was confirmation. That was all on the social front. Next came exposure in the places she thought she was most invulnerable, at work and in the private, perfumed world she shared with him. I started with the lunch she'd put on her calendar, the spa lunch that, in reality, was a private suite appointment that doubled as a rendezvous. I arranged for a business associate of mine to be at the boutique hotel that afternoon for an unrelated meeting. He agreed to be in position and to be discreet. My associate was briefed, not on drama, but on observation. He would pass on anything that confirmed my catalog of lies. When the day came, I sat at the bistro with a book I wasn't reading and a coffee that grew cold. I watched the spa entrance, the hotel drop-off lane, and the river of small decisions people make when they think they're invisible. She arrived looking composed, perfect hair, carefully selected outfit, but the way she moved was different, a quiet urgency that betrayed nerves. He met her with an embrace that was both practiced and intimate. They disappeared through the hotel doors together. The associate's message came like a quiet bell, photographs attached, times stamped. Evidence not of a single bad night but of routine. Appointment cards, room numbers, familiar faces, and the handshake of secrecy. I didn't gloat. I catalogued. That evening, I did something people rarely expect from someone who's been wronged. I acted as if everything was normal. I made dinner. I laughed at the television. I kissed her cheek goodnight, careful to make the motion feel automatic. My calm was not weakness, it was the final layer of camouflage. She had to think I was still wandering in the fog she'd created. Phase 3 was the hardest to plan, turning private evidence into public consequence without wandering into cruelty for its own sake. I wanted her choices to be witnessed by people whose approval mattered to her. Not because I enjoyed the fall, but because accountability in front of witnesses strips a lie of its oxygen. I began with her mother. I had, by then, spoken to her mother in ways that suggested concern without accusation. When I called again, I softened my tone, letting maternal defensiveness come forward while steering the conversation towards specifics. People close to someone who's cheating don't like to admit it, they'd rather protect a person's dignity than confront their cowardice. But dignity is not a shield against consequences. I asked her mother to meet me just coffee, I said, nothing dramatic. She came, eyes puffy with the kind of emotions that express years of small denials. We sat across from each other and I placed the phone on the table, the photograph of them at the hotel faced up like an accusation. She looked at it, then at me. She swallowed. Then, like a thin sheet ripping, she began to tell me things she'd always kept to herself, worried texts she'd received at odd hours, the smell of cigarette smoke in the guest bathroom, the strange receipts tucked into drawers. She hadn't wanted to know, she had wanted to preserve the image of her child's life the way it used to be. When I pressed, she confessed names, friends who'd known and whispered, relatives who had shrugged. It was a litany of small acceptances that felt like collusion. I told her, gently but firmly, what I planned to do. I wanted to give her the last opportunity to do the right thing. She did not commit. She left the cafe with my voice inside her ears, the way people carry small admonitions like a stone. Word spread faster than I anticipated. Rumor is a greedy beast. Feed it a morsel of truth and it devours everything in sight. By the time the weekend arrived, acquaintances who'd once avoided awkwardness stepped into the new climate with a curiosity that equaled cruelty. Invitations evaporated. Silent looks were exchanged at the grocery store. Her friends started sending messages with the polite, neutral tone of people who needed to protect themselves. Hope everything is okay, one text read. There was no warmth in it, only a distance that had once been impossible between us. Then I struck where it would hurt most, the family holiday that used to be a celebration of togetherness. I didn't crash it with a binder of evidence. I let the evidence speak without my voice shouting it. I emailed a small group, a pattern of people who mattered to her, attached to that email a tidy, clear packet, a timeline of rendezvous, screenshots of the most damning texts, and photos with timestamps. The subject line read, simply and coldly, I think you should know. There are few things more illuminating than watching the ripple effect of an email hit a family's group chat. Replies trickled in, then flooded. Denials, stunned silence, then the inexorable turning of suspicion into clarity. People wrote things like, I had a feeling, and why didn't she say anything, and this is awful. Her own cousin forwarded me a reply that said, bluntly, she's always been selfish. That was the moment the safety net she'd been wrapped in finally tore. When the phone calls started to come, I didn't answer all of them. I let some go to voicemail. Those I did answer I handled like a surgeon, calm, methodical. To some, I offered the chance for conversation. To others I simply let them listen as the evidence spoke for itself. The goal was not to humiliate them publicly, it was to show the truth to those who'd been content to act as if nothing had happened. She tried to fight back. There's always a moment when someone on the losing side tries to reclaim the narrative with fury. She accused me of manipulation. She called me vindictive. She told mutual friends that I'd been paranoid, intrusive, untrusting. And to a few, those words landed like splinters. But when you hand people concrete proof, photographs, messages, receipts, it's hard for them to craft a new story where the evidence contradicts the narrative you want. The real turning point came in the quiet of a Wednesday night. We were hosting a small dinner, an arrangement I had made to appear reasonable, a final act of normalcy before the world tilted. I invited a few neighbors, 2 coworkers of hers, and her sister. People she trusted. The house hummed with the kind of domestic soundtrack that disguises an execution, dishes clinking, polite laughter, the low thud of voices. She moved through it like a swimmer in familiar water, unaware that I had arranged for a different current beneath the surface. Halfway through the evening, one of the coworkers excused himself and stepped out to the porch. He checked his phone and then returned with a look I'd seen before when people were forced into moral recalculation. He cleared his throat and said, I don't know if you've seen this. He handed his phone to the sister, who scrolled through the email I had sent earlier. I watched her face move from curiosity to confusion to the pale white of someone who realizes the rug is being pulled out from under them. She left the room. I followed, not to confront, but to close the circle I had opened months ago. In the hallway, she pressed her back to the wall and let out a breath that felt more like the sound of a person trying to keep from falling. Her eyes were wide, the kind of wide that swallows dignity whole. "You told them," she whispered. "I told the people I thought should know," I said. "I gave them the facts. Why don't you?" She laughed, a thin, brittle sound. "Because I loved him," she said, as if that were a justification. Love is messy. Love is complicated. Love is also not an excuse to dismantle what you promised to build with someone else. "What you did was not just between you and him," I told her. "You involved everyone. You used people to hide behind." That's what I answered to. My voice was quiet, steady. I was done with pleading. I wanted accountability, not an explanation. When the sister returned, the room felt different. Conversations stuttered. The neighbor who once greeted us with boisterous jokes now stared at his hands. The coworkers exchanged looks that said more than words could. The sister found an excuse to leave early. Each retreat was a tiny collapse, a hand pulling away from something that had once seemed immovable. By the end of the week, invitations had dissolved, communications had dried up, and the profile of our life had narrowed into a cold focus on the truth. She tried to rally, texting old friends, sending sarcastic comments, trying to explain that the messages were taken out of context. But context is a commodity often unavailable to those who have lived defiantly in the margins of truth. There was a single moment I hadn't fully prepared for, the sight of her standing in the middle of the living room one evening, phone in hand, the light from the screen painting her face with the stark truth of exposure. She looked smaller than she had in months, the armor of secrecy stripped and dull. For a second something like regret crossed her features, real and raw and bone deep. I felt it like a physical blow. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, and for a second I thought she meant the affair. But she meant the truth of what she had been doing to the people who loved her. I could have launched into a lecture then, could have catalogued each selfish act until she'd absorbed shame molecule by molecule. Instead I said one thing: "Because you never asked me for honesty. You asked me to be comfortable with your lies." Her face crumpled then, and whatever remained of that proud defiance folded inward. People who have spent months feeling untouchable sometimes forget that consequences arrive quietly and precisely, like winter. You don't notice the temperature drop until it bites. The aftermath was a slow retraction into solitude. Her mother called less. Her friends offered tepid, cautious words that felt like bandages where wounds needed stitches. The man, her boyfriend, stopped answering. Either he had been frightened off by the knowledge that the eyes around them now saw plainly, or he had decided the cost of staying was higher than he wanted to pay. Either way, she was left with the hollow echo of actions that had once felt thrilling. I watched all of this happen with a strange mix of satisfaction and something darker, an ache that no amount of vindication could fill. There is no joy in reduced human faces, even if those faces belong to the people who made you feel disposable. Accountability has a cost. It asks for truth, yes, but its price is often lonely. As I closed each file and tucked away a printout, I understood the final phase was not punishment but reclamation. The house that had been split by betrayal needed repair. Trust that had been given away like loose change had to be rebuilt into something stronger or let go altogether. In setting the truth free, I had freed myself from the pretense of the life we'd lived, but I had also set loose consequences that could not be reknitted without a tremendous amount of work from everyone involved. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the same way I had months ago, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolute. The revenge I'd engineered had worked, people had seen, and solitude had replaced secret comfort. But the end of one war had not made me whole. It had simply cleared the battlefield. I slept in the spare room that night for the first time in years. The bed felt foreign, the silence a new thing to negotiate. When I closed my eyes, I saw not only her face from the moment she said the words that started it all, but the faces of the people who had enabled her, and the stamps of choices that had once seemed trivial. The map I had made had worked, the noose I'd tightened had cinched, and the house of cards had fallen. The real test would be what came next, whether I would rebuild a life around the ash, or walk away from the rubble entirely. That choice, I knew, would be up to me. But for the first time in a long time, the decision sat squarely in my hands. Outside, the world carried on indifferent, loud, bright. Inside, the pieces were everywhere: receipts, printouts, messages, and the heavy quiet of a man who had staged his own reckoning and watched it unfold. The machinery of revenge had done its work. The damage was done. Now came the inevitable question every architect of truth must answer: what would I build from the ruins? The silence after destruction is the loudest thing I have ever known. When all the noise of lies and confrontation fades, you're left with a stillness that presses against your ribs, a reminder that something enormous has shifted and there's no way back. That was the silence I woke to in the days after everything collapsed. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts but by echoes of a life that had ended without ceremony. She moved through the rooms like a shadow, her footsteps hesitant, as if she expected the walls to accuse her. I didn't yell anymore. I didn't need to. My voice had been replaced by evidence, by the faces of people who now saw her clearly. And in that silence, she began to unravel. I watched her crumble in small doses late at night when she stared at her phone, waiting for messages that didn't come, in the mornings when she lingered at the mirror longer than usual, as if trying to find the version of herself she used to be, in the afternoons when her friends' group chat no longer lit up her screen. The man she had risked everything for? He had gone silent, vanished into self-preservation like smoke fleeing a fire. He didn't return calls. He didn't answer texts. He didn't show up to the places where they once carved out stolen time. That abandonment stung her more than anything I could have orchestrated. Watching her wait for him, watching her finally realize she had burned a life for someone who had no intention of standing beside her, it was its own form of justice. But my revenge wasn't complete just because she was suffering. Pain fades. People rebuild illusions if you give them enough time. I wanted something deeper. I wanted change. Not just for her, but for me. So I left the house one evening, walked to the park nearby, and sat on the same bench where I had once planned proposals and anniversaries. The air was cool, the trees swaying in an indifference that comforted me. For the first time since the truth detonated, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond her. A clean break. A rebirth. The idea didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. I began with logistics. I opened a new bank account. I met with a lawyer, not because I wanted to destroy her further, but because I needed to protect what was left of myself. Papers were filed quietly, efficiently. The kind of legal machinery that doesn't scream, just grinds forward. When she received the notice, she didn't throw a tantrum. She just sat at the kitchen table, holding the envelope like it was written in another language. "You're really doing this," she whispered. "I already did," I said. She cried that night, not the furious tears of someone caught, but the broken sobs of someone who realizes the cost of their choices too late. I didn't comfort her. My compassion had been spent long ago. Word spread quickly. Divorce has a way of becoming a public fact faster than you intend. Neighbors whispered, coworkers speculated, family members shifted alliances like chess pieces. Some pitied her, others avoided her, a few expressed open anger. But for once, none of it fell on me. I was no longer the fool in the shadows. I was the man who refused to accept silence as a cage. And yet, revenge has its own poison. Once the machinery finished its work, I felt the emptiness creep in. The satisfaction of exposing her had dulled. The justice of consequences had already been served. What remained was me, alone with the quiet. That's when I realized revenge is not the destination. It's the bridge. I started to rebuild not around her absence, but around my presence. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected. I traveled alone for the first time in years, standing on a mountain ridge where the air was so sharp and clean it felt like it was cutting me open just to remind me I was alive. I joined a boxing gym, pounding my anger into a heavy bag until sweat replaced sorrow. I started writing, not stories of betrayal, but pages about strength, about rediscovery. Piece by piece, I built a life that no longer orbited her gravity. She tried, occasionally, to claw her way back. Apologies slipped through texts. Late-night calls with trembling voices begged for conversation. Once, she showed up at my door, her eyes red, her hands shaking. "I made a mistake," she said. "No," I replied. "You made a choice." I closed the door gently, not out of cruelty, but out of mercy for both of us. The last time I saw her, it was by accident. Months later, at a grocery store we both used to visit together. She looked thinner, older somehow. Not in years, but in weight. As if carrying regret aged her faster than time ever could. She avoided my eyes. I didn't chase hers. That chapter had ended, written in permanent ink. Now, when I wake in the mornings, the silence in the house feels different. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't haunt. It breathes with me. It feels like possibility. Revenge gave me back my clarity. Consequences gave me closure. But in the end, what saved me was choosing myself over the wreckage. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise after the fall, how you take the ashes in your hands and decide to build something better. I am not the same person I was when this began. I am sharper. Stronger. Unapologetically mine. And that, more than revenge, is the real victory.